Happy Monday, everyone, and welcome back to Cozy Horror with me, Dr. Plague. Let's get you settled in with 5 more great stories to start your week off right. Today, we're really going to start with the best of the best. We're going to hear the 5 highest rated stories on Reddit. Well, the ones that didn't get removed, at least. We're going to start off with an old classic, a story about someone who finds something weird while perusing the internet. So let's hear a story about the Meat Man.
It started as most things do, with boredom. I was surfing around YouTube, looking for funny videos or scary videos, when I stumbled across something that caught my interest. It was run by a user who went by The Meat Man, and it involved stop-motion footage using some very disturbing puppets. The thing that honestly caught my eye first was the thumbnail. It was a figure that appeared to be crafted entirely out of ground meat. I remember seeing the model and lifting an eyebrow as I took in what I was actually seeing. Now, when I tell you that the models were grotesque, I don't mean they were ugly or badly made. They were very well put together, and the amount of detail that had gone into them was astonishing. These meat puppets had hair and clothes and facial features that had all been meticulously crafted to the point of being a little uncanny. I would have almost expected them to blink or move on their own, and they seemed too lifelike for the medium. The episode I had found was episode 5, and as I watched it, I quickly began to realize that this was no normal bit of YouTube content. Episode 5 involved 3 characters, Lisa, Steve, and Michael, as they prepared for the arrival of a 4th character, Dawn. The background music was jangly and discordant, somewhere between a calliope and a merry-go-round, and it often made the voices hard to hear. The characters were cleaning up the house, which was mostly a sheet of paper with windows drawn near the ceiling, and some furniture crafted from modeling clay. As they cleaned, a voice told us how Lisa was being lazy and expected Michael and Steve to do the majority of the work. I remember thinking that was odd because her character moved and dusted and tidied at least as much as the others did, and they seemed to be working well together. After a few minutes of herky-jerky cleaning, a hand came down from the ceiling and congratulated Steve and Michael on a job well done. It then pointed a pudgy finger at Lisa and scolded her for being so lazy. The voice said that Lisa would not be allowed to join the party later, since she hadn't helped. As Michael and Steve walked off stage, Lisa's character curled into a ball as the loud party music played in the background. I remember feeling bad for Lisa as the last frame sat frozen in place, the camera zooming in on the prostrate Lisa, as she sat hunkered against the wall. Though I couldn't hear anything over the loud party music, I could see the small figure shaking a little as though she might be crying. What the hell was this? Why did it suddenly make me feel almost voyeuristic for watching the suffering of a lumpy knot person? After that, my morbid curiosity was hooked. I went to the attached channel and saw that he had about 10 videos up, all added within the last month or so. His channel was small, only about 80 subscribers, and they were all in that same stop-motion style, where he used the figure's grotesqueness to his advantage. I found the first episode, Friendship, and decided to watch it. The video was about Lisa, the meat puppet from before, and how she was sad and lonely all by herself. The puppet mostly sat in the same familiar position, bent over and appearing to sob. Suddenly, 2 other familiar puppets, Steve and Michael, came into the scene, and Lisa seemed happy to see them. The pudgy hand, whom she called Father, said that he had seen that she was lonely and had gotten her some friends so she wouldn't cry so much. The hand stroked her delicate hair, and it seemed to be much nicer to her than it had been in the previous episode. The 3 hugged and said they would be friends forever. Then the episode ended and the screen went black. It had lasted less than 5 minutes all told, but it still made me feel strange and put off. The puppets were so odd-looking, and I just couldn't shake the feeling that there was something not right about them. I was also hooked, and immediately loaded up the second video. It was like a train wreck. I needed to see how it came out, no matter what the carnage looked like. The next 2 episodes were pretty similar to what I'd come to expect. They were called Cohabitation and Family, and followed the lives of Lisa and her new roommates. They set up some furniture and had some getting-to-know-you chatter as wonky music played in the background, making their words hard to hear sometimes. It was the typical stop-motion fare, but there were odd refrains sometimes in the middle of the stop motion. During one in particular, the boys, Steve and Michael, were talking with Lisa about what they were going to make for dinner. The stop motion abruptly cut, and you could see 5 or 6 seconds of the model just standing, as loud sobbing came from the background. Amidst that sobbing, there was a soft but angry voice trying to quiet them. I had to rewind it a few times in order to catch it, and I remember wondering if this were some sort of artistic film or something. Was the artist trying to make some kind of point? Maybe he was trying to hide it amidst the stop motion or something, make it even more artsy. It wasn't until the 4th episode that things got bad for Lisa. I noticed that while the first 3 episodes had come out one a day, the 4th video had taken almost a week to come out. This wouldn't have been strange for any other channel, but the total shift from episode 3 to episode 4 was alarming. The video was about 5 minutes long, and seemed to entail Lisa going out on her own for a night walk and getting lost. She had gone out for a walk, despite being told not to by Father Hand, and had gotten herself lost in a forest that seemed to be drawn on white paper. The trees were the big swampy kind you often saw in kids' art assignments, and it was clear that Father Hand was no artist. He wasn't a consistent narrator either, because his voice and his tone seemed to get angrier the longer the episode went on. The condition of the puppet looked ghastly, and that only added to the surreal horror of the show. The Lisa puppet was clearly in bad shape, and halfway through the show, a piece fell off of her and landed on the table. The narration ended abruptly, as the music continued over the visual of the graying puppet just standing in place. The sound of someone stomping off was audible over the jangly Discord, and the steps sounded heavy and angry. There was a brief moment of someone begging to be let go, but it cut away just as the sound of screaming started. The video was edited poorly, and an attempt had clearly been made to cut it out. When the show resumed, the Lisa puppet was complete again, with what appeared to be a hunk of fresh meat attached. The piece that had fallen off, however, still lay on the table, as though it were no more useful than a snakeskin now. Towards the end of the episode, the Lisa puppet bent over and seemed to weep as she was alone and scared in the forest. This weeping was overlaid by a soft and frantic weeping in the background as well, though I'm not sure we were meant to hear that part. All of a sudden, the Father Hand came and showed her the way home. It scolded her for running away, and told her she must never do that again. Much like an actual father, the Hand seemed relieved as well as angry, and the meat Lisa went with him to the house meekly enough. When they returned, the Steve and Michael puppet did not seem happy to see her. They shunned her silently, and the episode ended with Lisa crying in a corner somewhere. Then the episode faded to black, and the credits rolled. I hovered my mouse over episode 6, not sure if I really wanted to watch it. Episode 4, called Thankless, made episode 5 make a lot more sense. Father Hand was still likely punishing Lisa for running away, though the start of the episode made it very clear that Lisa had just been going out for a walk. The episodes were easy enough to follow, but something in them still made me uneasy. Why were these characters living under this supposedly fatherly Hand character? Why did the narrator call them roommates if the Father Hand treated them like his children? The whole show was just odd and had a very surreal nature to it. There seemed to be an underlying story that I just wasn't getting. I was invested, though, and I had to see how it came out. Episode 6 was the strangest by far, and the comments on the video seemed to prove that I wasn't just going crazy. It was called Melancholy, and the episode started with the same weird dance music and a shot of Lisa hunched up and crying. The crying, however, was not the canned sound it had been before. The episode was 3.5 minutes of someone sobbing heartbreakingly, the kind of sobs that are equal parts hopelessness and terror. The camera seemed to be slowly panning in on the intricate face of the meat puppet as the sobs in the background went on and on. I had seen some strange videos in my time, but this one definitely took the cake. The final shot was of the eye of the meat puppet, clearly defined and lovingly traced. You could see the meat beginning to mold, see the bright splotches that decorated the surface, and just before the screen faded to black, you could hear the elevated terror in the voice of the person sobbing, before it was shut off by the end of the episode. I had to take a break after that one, reading the comments as I tried to make sense of what I had just watched. The Meat Man's audience seemed to be a little divided on whether this was an artistic expression or something much darker. A user had said that the sobbing and the screaming had been unique, and that they couldn't find it anywhere online, or at least on any of the free sites. Another user questioned whether they were too real or not, thinking this might be part of someone's torture fantasy, but others seemed to think it was just an avant-garde piece, and that was a little too pompous for its own good. What they did agree on was that even if it was acting, the screams were a little too real, and that they all felt some kind of way about those cries of anguish. I had hoped that maybe episode 7 would be a return to sanity, but episode 7, called Jealousy, was just as weird. The narrator was telling us that the Dawn character was adjusting very nicely to the house. All the tenants loved her. They all wanted to be her friend. And indeed, Father Hand, Steve, and Michael were all standing around her and moving animatedly. Only one character, Lisa, didn't seem to want to be friends with Dawn. She seemed to be in another room, still hunkered up and crying. The narrator explained that Lisa was jealous of Dawn, and that Father was becoming cross with her attitude. The sobs from the previous episode were gone, but there were some other low noises, barely discernible over the loud jangling music. The puppets seemed to be in much better condition as well, and I suppose they had changed the meat out on them recently. The Father Hand came and yelled at Lisa some more, but she just stayed hunkered up and crying. Finally he left, and the episode ended as the camera zoomed in on the little meat woman hunkered in her anguish. I looked at the next episode and wondered if I really wanted to see more. It felt like I'd been watching for hours, but it turned out that all 7 episodes had taken less than 30 minutes. Something about watching the byplay between the characters had gripped me, and I felt that I needed to finish it. At the same time, there was something much darker here than I had expected. This was like someone's confession. The whole thing felt very intimate, and I felt almost voyeuristic for watching. I clicked the next episode, though, telling myself that another 3 episodes wouldn't do much damage. How wrong I'd been. Episode 8, called Hatred, opened with Lisa leaning against a paper wall as the others tried to get in her room. They started out nicely asking her to come out, wanting to talk, wanting to see her. The narrator told us that Lisa had been shirking her chores and saying unkind things to Father Hand about the other roommates. Father Hand had, of course, shared these things with the others, and now they wanted to talk to her. As their knocking became pounding, all 3 of them pushing and pulling at the door as they banged and kicked, Lisa pulled her hands to her ears and put her head between her knees. The narrator told us how Michael and Steve wanted to talk, and how Dawn was really upset that Lisa would judge her so hastily. As they pounded and banged on the paper door, Father Hand suddenly came into the scene. Lisa looked up from her knees and seemed unsure of what to make of the sudden appearance of the fatherly phalange. Father Hand told her that she had brought discord to the house, and that he could no longer ignore her insolence. The hand turned itself into a fist and began to beat the puppet savagely. Chunks of meat fell off and were squashed beneath the pounding. The wire body was twisted and warped, and the whole scene was made all the more horrific by the overlaying carnival tune that scratched like razors across my brain. It ended as Steve and Michael knocked, and the camera zoomed in on the sad pile of meat that Lisa had become. The episode ended abruptly, and when I saw a pale figure staring back at me from the suddenly dark screen, it took a half a second to realize it was the sweating image of myself. Episode 9, Contrition, was next, and there was no question on whether I would watch it or not. I needed to know what came next. I needed to know how this ended. Episode 9 was as different from the others as night to day. It was a shaky cam of someone walking through the woods by night. A butter yellow light provided a small patch of illumination, and whoever was recording was breathing heavily as they trudged through the woods. The woods were preternaturally silent as they went, and the leaves crunching underfoot were loud enough to be jarring. The video was 4 minutes long, and 3.5 minutes were nothing but walking feet, crunching leaves, and heavy breathing. Then abruptly, they stopped before a small round stone, the ground before it freshly turned up, and put to rest sloppily. "Sleep well, Lisa," came the phlegmy voice of the cameraman. Then it all went black again. I hit the 10th episode before I could think about it, wanting to see how it ended. Episode 10, Ambivalence, seemed to be a return to normal. Dawn was sitting on the couch, seeming to laugh at something on the TV that was out of view. Michael and Steve seemed to be milling about, cleaning up or just chatting. The wall that had marked Lisa's room was nowhere to be seen. The Father Hand looked over all of them, benevolently, as the narrator told us about Michael looking for a book he had misplaced, and Dawn watching her favorite TV show. All seemed well. All seemed normal, other than the broken corpse of Lisa that lay on the floor. The damage that Father Hand had done still lay about the ground, and the meat was brown and dry. Flies had begun to circle the meat body, and if one of the puppets had to go near her, they seemed to walk over her body without noticing her. The only character who seemed to notice her was the father hand. He would look down at her from time to time, almost smugly, and shake his head before looking back at the other puppets happily. Episode 10 went dark, and I was yet again left wondering what I had seen. The videos seemed to have moved into my head rent-free in less time than it would have taken to watch a movie. I had moved on to other videos, other activities, but the images were never far from my mind. I'd been known to suggest strange videos to friends of mine, even link them on Reddit to certain groups. This one, however, was not one of them. I was hesitant to talk about it, let alone tell people about it. I did not want others to suffer under this like I had, and that was probably why I was thinking about it when I saw the poster. I was traveling for work. I work as an expert witness for specific cases, and I do a lot of traveling and a lot of waiting, which often leads to the aforementioned boredom. I was driving through Michigan when a call to nature became too much to ignore, and I had to pull over at a nearby rest stop. I was heading to the bathroom when I saw the missing persons wall. My eyes found the woman before I could stop myself, and my breath caught in my throat as I came up short. The woman's name was Elizabeth Rainey, 23, and she'd been missing for the last 4 months. The poster was new, unmarred by yellowing or creasing, and I pulled it easily from the bulletin board. Looking at her face, I realized how much had gone into each of those puppets. Her nose, her wide forehead, the small dimple in her chin, the dent in her left cheek from some childhood accident. They were all there. They had all been lovingly added to the porous face of that meat puppet. I took the poster back to my car, my check-in time approaching quickly, and called a friend of mine who works with the local police department. I told him about the girl, about the YouTube channel, about the videos, and he said he'd look into it without much enthusiasm. When he called me about a week later to thank me for the information, he sounded much more interested in what I had to say. I called him again a few weeks ago and offered to buy him a drink if he'd sate my curiosity. He was willing, but said I might not want to know as bad as I thought. Over drinks, he told me the whole sad story. My friend had a friend, too. His friend was an agent with the FBI, and after watching the videos, my friend had called his friend. He sent him a link to the channel and asked him to take a look. After his friend had watched the drama for himself, he had tracked the IP to see what he could find. Turned out that Elizabeth wasn't the only familiar face that was missing in the Michigan area. Michael Chavez, Steve Schwote, and Don Lee were also missing from the same area. The IP address was coming from an old house near Lake Huron. The owner, David Matthews, owned the house and quite a lot of the acreage out there. When they had raided his house, they had caught David by surprise and found more than they bargained for. He had been keeping them in his basement. The sick bastard had a large finished basement with 4 separate rooms. The central room held a couch, a TV, and a large kitchen table with a small set for the show and a camera. The puppets were on a shelf nearby, their bodies gray and sagging off their clothes hanger bodies. The other implement in the room was a large, rusty meat grinder. A meat grinder with strands of rotting meat hanging from the spout. He had said flies had been thick in the room, and the sounds of moans had not begun until they started kicking down doors. Dawn, Michael, and Steve had been laying in their respective rooms. Most of them, anyway, my friend had said, taking a long pull from his beer. He sent me the photos of the crime scene. I wish to God he hadn't. Dawn had been in the room that had likely once belonged to Elizabeth. David had been in the room that had likely once belonged to Elizabeth. He'd been wearing her dress, the fabric badly stretched around his frame, and was sobbing in the corner. No matter what the agents had said to him, his response was always the same, his rocking making a strange grinding noise as his bottom slid over the concrete. He kept saying, "I shouldn't have played God. I shouldn't have made her sleep." Again and again and again. The others didn't say much of anything. He had scooped them to the bone, cutting off fingers and toes, arms and legs, so he could grind them up to make those damn puppets. He'd used tourniquets and animal tranquilizers to keep them alive. Michael and Steve were a little more than torsos, Steve having half a leg and Michael a little more than an elbow. Dawn was missing her legs, but her arms were thankfully intact. She'd only been in the basement for a month, and it seemed he hadn't had much time to take from her. They had gotten all of them out of there, and David Matthews, the meat man, was now in custody. "A real win for the good guys," my friend had said, his stare 1,000 miles long, though none of them will ever walk again. The men are in a catatonic state, and the girl only gibbers, but at least we saved them before he could finish his sick little play. They had yet to find Lisa's body, but he told me they hadn't given up yet. As I sit here, going over the facts as I write, it all just runs through my head like a rat in a maze. Every moan, every sob was this sicko harvesting his victims so he could replace the flesh of his precious puppets. I was an unwilling participant in this, watching and encouraging this sick bastard to continue. I want to forget it, but I can't. I may never forget what I saw in that short hour of my life. I may never forget the terrible knowledge that the meat man has invested in me, and I may find my curiosity sated for quite some time. I think my days of roaming YouTube and my boredom may be at an end.
An oldie but a goodie, to be sure. Coming up next, we have a story about a school who cancels a certain project that's been very popular, but more than a little horrific. So let's hear a story about the Flat Stanley project.
Did anyone else become a participant in the social experiment known as Flat Stanley? I went to elementary school in the mid-90s, 95 to 2001, and I was in the 3rd grade when our teacher announced that we would be taking part in the Flat Stanley project. For those of you unfamiliar with the concept, Flat Stanley was a series of books about a flat kid who goes on all kinds of weird adventures to famous places. New York, the Grand Canyon, France, Australia. This guy went everywhere and was like a flat version of Curious George. We started reading them in class, making them part of our English hour, and one day, Mrs. Gazel told us that we were going to have a contest. Today's English lesson is to create your own Flat Stanley. It can look however you want, but the winner of the contest will get 3 prizes from the prize basket, and will be the class's Flat Stanley that we send into the world to participate in the Flat Stanley project. We were all excited. This was a chance to see our work in pictures that would come back, not to mention get some cool stuff out of the prize basket. We all drew out our own concepts for Flat Stanley and set to work coloring and designing him. My Flat Stanley was a spy, wearing a big trench coat and a wide hat and carrying binoculars. He wore his regular clothes under it, and he just looked so goofy that I thought I had a real chance of winning. My friend Todd laughed when he glanced over at it, telling me it was cool. His Flat Stanley was a football player for the Georgia Bulldogs, his favorite team, and I thought his Flat Stanley looked cool too. So when the class voted on the displayed Stanleys, I figured Kaylee's Flat Stanley would win. It had a sparkly tiara and a ball gown she had made with felt. That was the one that I voted for, at least, since you couldn't vote for your own. And if not hers, I figured Matt's would win. His Flat Stanley was a truck driver, complete with a net hat and a sleeveless t-shirt, and he'd put a lot of work into it. I knew some kids might find mine funny, but I never figured I stood a chance. I hadn't used any special materials or done anything really innovative, and I figured I'd hang him in my room when I got home. So when Miss Gazel announced that my Flat Stanley had won, I was shocked. I went home that night with a new bounce ball, a pocket-sized Stretch Armstrong, and an eraser shaped like a Pikachu. I also went home to tell my mom that I had won the contest and that my Flat Stanley would be going out to other schools and other places, so we could get pictures back and see all the cool places that he had been. She said that sounded really neat, and we brainstormed where he might end up. Paris, Disneyland, the moon. We both laughed at that one, and maybe even at an Atlanta Braves baseball game. We had a good afternoon thinking about where he might end up, and when Dad got home, he joined us in our daydream. I went to bed that night, thinking about all the cool places Stanley might go, and what we might see when he came back. It started out pretty normal. Mrs. Gazel sent the package out to a school the next town over, and they sent us back pictures a week later. Stanley had been to a volleyball game, an art museum, and finally to a play put on by the class. They sent him up the road to the next school, where Stanley went on a hike, went to the zoo, and then went to a baseball game. It wasn't the Atlanta Braves, but it was a t-ball game, and that was still pretty neat. This went on for a couple of months, Flat Stanley traveling to Texas, New Mexico, California, Idaho, and Kansas. We hung the pictures up, sent out thank you cards, and talked about the places that Flat Stanley had gone. It was a good time, and we used it for our geography class to help us learn the states. It seemed that Flat Stanley was in all our lessons that year. Math, if Flat Stanley travels from Burbank, California to El Paso, Texas, how far has he traveled? Geography,
If Flat Stanley is at the Alamo, then where is he? And of course, English, where we read the books and the letters that we got back out loud. It was approaching April when we came to class to find that Miss Gazel wasn't there. We were all pretty bummed because Wednesdays were usually when we got our Flat Stanley letters, and the sub told us that Miss Gazel would talk to us about it when she got back. There was no Flat Stanley that day, and when Miss Gazel came back the following week, we moved on to something else. All the Flat Stanley stuff had disappeared from the class, and its absence was as noticeable as our missing teacher had been. She never told us what had happened, and it was a mystery talked about in hushed tones well into the 4th grade. It would probably still be a mystery if I hadn't decided a decade later to pursue teaching. I'm in my 2nd year of college now, and I've progressed into student teaching. I decided that I wanted to try my hand at being an elementary school teacher, something like 4th or 5th grade, and when they gave me the name of my mentor, I realized I knew her. It was Miss Gazel, my old 3rd grade teacher. She taught 5th grade now, her retirement coming up on the horizon, and she smiled when she realized who I was, giving me a big hug. "Welcome back. I'm glad to see you decided to take up teaching." Her classroom was in the same room her 3rd grade class had been in, and the kids reminded me a lot of me and my friends when we were her students. They were a good group. They were hungry to learn, and they liked her a lot. Miss Gazel was the kind of teacher that kept kids' attention effortlessly, and I hoped it was a skill that I could learn from her. The kiddos in her class took to me pretty quickly, and soon I was teaching classes while Miss Gazel just sat back and observed. Something about being in her class again made me remember my days as a 3rd grader at this school, and that made me think about Flat Stanley. There was nothing like that in her 5th grade class. The kids would have probably thought it was babyish, but it did rekindle some of the mystery I had felt from a decade before. I tried to find a good time to bring it up, but nothing seemed to present itself. Until Friday, on my 2nd week. I was packing up to leave when Miss Gazel offered to take me out for some drinks. I was a little surprised, and she must have noticed because she laughed airily at my look of chagrin. "What, you didn't know teachers drank?" she said, her coat over one arm. I decided to join her and found a small group of other teachers waiting for us when we arrived. Some of them I knew, some of them I didn't, but it turned out that this was a regular thing for them. They drank and talked about their week, complained about some students who were especially difficult, and generally blew off steam. Mrs. Gazel and I sat in the corner, nodding and listening to them, and she smiled at me over the lip of her 4th glass of wine sometime near 11. "I've been sending glowing reviews to your professor," she confided. "You're one of the better student teachers I've ever worked with. I think you're probably a shoo-in to be hired at the end of your training period, and I'll recommend you to the principal myself, if he doesn't extend you a position." I thanked her, sipping my 2nd beer as I took it all in. "Hey, can I ask you something?" I said suddenly. "Neither of us are drunk enough for you to offer me a ride home yet, big fella," she said, snorting into her glass. No, nothing like that. Something always bugged me from my time in your class, and I was wondering if you remember the Flat Stanley project we did." Some of the color fled from her cheeks, and I could swear that she shuddered a little. "I'm surprised you even remember that. It was a long time ago." "Well, everything disappeared from the class so quickly, and when you came back, you never brought it up again. All the books were gone from the class library. All the letters were gone. Everything was missing. I think we talked about it for half of the 4th grade before something else caught our attention." She looked far away for a moment, as if contemplating whether she actually wanted to answer me or not. "I think I need a little air. Would you care to escort me?" I told her I would, and we left amidst a hail of catcalls about cradle robbers and cougars on the prowl. I'd taken her arm, and she was trying to be unbothered by it, but she was stiff and a little unsteady as we walked out onto the patio. Something had her spooked, and I didn't think it was the half-hearted teasing from her peers. When we came outside, she leaned against the railing outside the seating area, looking at the waves as they crashed against the water below us. I came to lean beside her, realizing she was trying to figure out how to begin, and having trouble getting started. Are you sure you want to know? That's a pretty messed up story, but I suppose we could count it as a part of your education. Maybe it'll help you avoid something that got me in a lot of hot water and canceled the Flat Stanley project for the whole school. I told her I did, pretty intrigued with what could have happened to make a whole school ban something as benign as a kid's art project. Well, you remember that we sent the little guy around to the school the next town over? Well, then they sent it to another school, and that school sent it to another school, and so on and so forth. We had about the best results out of any of the classes, getting back about twice as much material as is normal. I started integrating it into the curriculum, as you remember, and it was such a huge part of our class. I appreciated the material. Sometimes it's hard to keep kids' attention when they're that young, but Stanley really helped. Then one day, I arrived to find a new package had come the day before. She stopped, shivering a little as she watched the waves. Someone had sent our Flat Stanley back, and I was excited as I opened the envelope. We were starting fractions that day. At least we were supposed to, and I wanted to see if there was some way I could work fractions into the package. I would get my wish, but not in the way I wanted. I had reached into my pocket for a cigarette, and Miss Gazel asked if she could have one. I had never seen her smoke before, but as she inhaled that first mouthful, she closed her eyes and looked euphoric. Flat Stanley was supposed to go to Carter Wild Elementary School in Boise, but it appeared he had gone somewhere else. You're too young to remember it, but there was a pretty terrible person in the Midwest in the late 90s. He was picking up young women who were hitchhiking. The police would find them later after he was done with them. Somehow, he got our Flat Stanley and thought it would be funny to use him to taunt the police. He had murdered 5 girls that week. Her voice broke as she said it, the tip of the cigarette jittering as she spoke, and attached pictures of them to the Stanley he sent back. They were horrific, and as I spilled them out of my desk, I recognized what I had at once. She was shaking, and as I put my jacket around her, she smiled ruefully at me. You're a good kid, despite making me relive this. We knew that the kids in my class had all kinds of weird ideas about what had happened, but we also knew that none of you knew the truth. She took a long pull off the cigarette and let the ash dribble down. The first girl in the pictures was Ashley Manx. He had cut her chest open, the X going right between her breasts, and skinned her open like some kind of flower. Her face was set in the worst possible look you've ever seen, and right there in the middle of her chest was Flat Stanley. Your Flat Stanley. I thought I got it then, but Miss Gazel hadn't even gotten rolling yet. Then there was Frances Carmichael, the girl he took from the fair. She was looking for a ride, and he gave her one. He cut her arms and legs off while she was alive, burning the wounds closed with an iron so she'd bleed out slowly. Finally, he cut her throat, and after that, he put 1 foot from that Flat Stanley in her teeth and took a picture. He was standing upright, her body on display, and her burnt nubs are something I still can't quite get out of my head. I'm sorry, I started, but she cut me off. No, you wanted to know, so let me get it out. It's like the confessional I used to go to when I was little. If I get it all out, maybe it won't haunt me as bad. He got Dawn Cambridge and Betsy Cambridge next, split their backs, and made a pair of blood angels out of them. He set Flat Stanley in the middle of them, the crevice between their sides, and snapped a picture. They were still looking for them when they found Ashley. Finally, he got Melanie Fasterly, and she was probably the worst. He beat her with a sledgehammer until her bones were like glass shards. The picture he sent back was unrecognizable as a human being. If it hadn't been for the hair, I would never have known what it was. He stood the cutout between her lumpy legs as if to save her modesty, and she honestly looked about as flat as he was, if you don't count all the bone spurs sticking out of her. Mrs. Gazel was shaking, the shivering causing her to stutter over the last few words, and when she looked back at me, there was regret on her face. All the alcohol had been burned out of her, the fear having shaken it loose as her mind remembered what was likely the worst day of her life. I called the police, of course I did, but my real concern was for you guys. If this psycho had mailed this back to us, then he had the address of the school. If he knew where you were, then he could pay us a visit and make us his next photo collage, and I couldn't have lived with myself if that had happened. So I gave the police everything, and they agreed to keep an eye on the school for a while. I needn't have bothered. The twisted fuck had a particular hunting ground, and a particular prey, neither of which were children in Georgia. He never did pay us a visit, but it took 6 more girls before they caught him. I didn't sleep well until they had him in custody, and I didn't sleep soundly until they slipped the needle into his arm last year. He was a rotten, twisted individual, and he deserved every ounce of what he got. I had to take the rest of the week off to recover from his little present, and there was talk that they might want me to undergo counseling. When I got back, the school had scrapped all that Flat Stanley stuff. It was too much of a risk that some student would get a hold of it next. And they couldn't have that. Some of the teachers thought we should tell the students. Some of them thought we should tell the parents, and a few of them thought that I should be fired for some reason. It was decided that we wouldn't tell any of them, and we would never speak of it again. In exchange for not causing an uproar, I got to keep my job. I thought it was a pretty fitting trade back then. So that's the whole sad story. Cure your curiosity? It did. Mrs. Gazel was right, too. They offered me a job at the end of my training, and it turned out it was her job. Mrs. Gazel retired at the end of the year, wanting to spend more time with her grandkids and her daughters. We still get drinks sometimes, and she really is a lovely woman. As for me, I noticed one major part of the contract that I was presented with. They put it in bold so you couldn't possibly miss it, so if you break it, you really only have yourself to blame. Under no circumstances will our students participate in any program that sends documents to other schools or entities without the express permission of administration. This includes pen pal programs, Hands Across the Water, the Flat Stanley Project, and other affiliated projects therewithin. I signed that contract 10 years ago, and now I instruct student teachers myself. In the decade I've been teaching, I've never broken that rule, and I have Mrs. Gazel's story to thank for that. When you send something like that out into the world, you never know who might answer back, and what they might have to say. It's hard to believe, but it didn't even make the top 3. It was certainly one of my favorite stories. Coming up next, and starting out our top 3, we have a story about a strange barber who cuts hair for free. Oh, but the cost might be a little too steep for some. Could even be your sanity. So let's learn why the barber cuts my hair for free. Mr. Faskell has cut my hair since I moved to the city about 3 years ago. He's an older guy, maybe 50s or 60s, and he possesses that look and drawl that make me think he's from up north somewhere. He could be from New York, Maine, or even the Great Lakes area, but I never asked him where. He's not a big guy, maybe $1.20 in the rain, and he cuts my hair just the way I like it. High and tight on the sides, leave me some on top, so whoever I'm sleeping with has something to play with, and neaten up my sideburns. I can't grow a real beard, or he'd probably trim that for me, too. The best part is, he does it all for free. Hard to believe, I know, but it seems there was a cost after all. Our relationship started easily enough. I had an interview with the city, maintenance and custodial, and I wanted to look sharp for the interview.
Everything other than that paid nothing, or barely nothing, and I really wanted to lock this job down. I had a nice set of interview clothes, some comfortable business shoes, and a winning smile. Now all I needed was a sharp haircut to seal the deal. That's where the problem lies. My hair grows abnormally fast. It always has, and when I was a kid, my dad used to bemoan the fact. He made jokes about going to barber school or buying stock in master cuts, but he always understood that when it was time for a cut, it was time for a cut. If you let it go longer than 2 weeks without a cut, it just turned into a shapeless mass. By the end of week 3, I looked like a sheepdog, and Dad would look over his paper and sigh before saying that it was time to take me to the barber. Faskel's Hair and Beards was about a block from my house, and when I stuck my head in to get their prices, Mr. Faskel looked up and smiled at me over a pile of hair he was sweeping up. Then, suddenly, he took a deep breath, and when he opened his eyes again, I asked if everything was okay. "Just fine, young man. Say, you look like a man in need of a haircut. Am I right?" I told him he sure was, and he invited me in and told me to have a seat. He had about 1,000,000 questions on my first visit. No, I didn't usually let it get this long. I liked it this way, but a little long on the top. No, I didn't use any special shampoo, just the dandruff shampoo from the Dollar General. No, I wasn't really prone to dry scalp, but a fella can never be too careful. On and on and on and on until finally it was done. He had cut it just right, the perfect length, the perfect fade, everything. I asked him what I owed him, and he told me it was free. "Come on," I said, "you gotta charge me something." "I let my customers decide what they can afford, so whatever you can afford is fine with me. Think of it as a tip." I was okay with that, and I walked out with a free haircut, while Mr. Faskel waved me out with a $10 tip. I left with a spring in my step. I felt like a new man, and I was ready for that job interview. I went home, got a shower, and when I looked in the mirror, I knew I had this. The next time I went to see Mr. Faskel, I left him a $20 tip and told him that it was all thanks to him that I'd gotten my awesome new job. For the next couple of years, I always went to Mr. Faskel's when I needed a cut. If I had a date coming up, I went to see Mr. Faskel. Promotion interview at work? Faskel. I told my friends about the shop. I went there just to get touch-ups and talk with the old fella. In no time at all, Mr. Faskel and I were friends. He liked the same sporting team I did, watched a lot of the same movies and TV shows I did, and even liked a lot of the same classic rock that I did. It was great, and I always looked forward to my bi-monthly haircut. Then, about 2 months ago, it all changed. I had come in to get my bi-monthly haircut, telling Mr. Faskel about the previous week as he cut and styled my hair. He was always meticulous, getting everything just right as he cut and trimmed, and when he turned me around to look in the mirror, it was the same way I'd gotten it for the last 3 years. I thanked him, handed him a 20, and told him I'd see him next time. "Of course," Mr. Faskel said, sweeping up the hair. "Come back any time." I was leaving, almost a block up the street, when I realized I didn't have my sunglasses. They were my brand new Oakleys, too, and they'd cost quite a bit of cash. I remembered having them when I came in, taking them off my head, and setting them down at the station that Mr. Faskel used. No problem, I thought. I'll just go back and get them. I stepped in, saying I'd forgotten my sunglasses and was just going to grab them. That's when I saw them. Mr. Faskel was looking up guiltily, his eyes panicked. He was down on all fours, eating the hair he had swept up off the ground, like he was a cow in the field. When he turned, I could see pieces of hair sticking to his lip like accusations. He stood up, wiping himself off and brushing at his mouth as he tried to explain. "Now, I know what this looks like, and I'll admit that, yes, I was eating your hair, but you have to understand your hair is what I look forward to. I don't eat just anyone's hair. Well, I used to. Now I can't wait to see you come in so I can eat something good. Why are you looking at me like that? I'm not crazy. I'm not crazy," he shouted, getting up as he stalked towards me. He seemed to realize that saying that made him sound crazy, so he switched gears. Haven't I always done good work for you?
There's nowhere in this town where you could get a haircut for less than $25. I cut your hair for tips. I've cut your hair for the dollars in your pocket. I've been good to you, and you've been a good customer. Let's just pretend this never happened, okay? Let's just go back to..." But I didn't hear the rest. I snatched up my sunglasses and was out the door before he could say another word. I spent a while thinking about that, and the more I processed it, the worse it seemed to get. It began to haunt my dreams, seeing him bent over, eating the hair straight off the floor, looking back at me and grinning with my hair in his teeth. And I'd wake up in a cold sweat. I know it's not a particularly scary dream, but it freaked me the hell out. I don't really like it when people put hair in their mouth. I had a girl in elementary school who used to chew on her pigtails, and it bred in me a lifetime phobia. Just the thought of wet hair in someone's mouth makes me want to puke, and I can't even touch someone's hair without cringing if they have a wig on. I know, it's a weird collection of phobias, but they're mine. It only took a couple of weeks before I started seeing new growth. My hair just grows too fast, and after 3 weeks, my boss commented that I was looking shabby. He handed me a $20 out of his own wallet and told me to go get a trim over lunch. I took it and started looking for somewhere to get a trim. The city had quite a few shops, but it seemed like wherever I went, I caught someone looking at me out of the corner of my eye. It was never anything I could prove, just a feeling, and when I looked up, I could almost swear I'd catch a glimpse of Mr. Faskel. He was gone when I looked up, but it made me extremely paranoid. I became aware of more than a glimpse as the weeks went on. When I rode the bus to work, I caught the familiar deep inhale of someone smelling my hair. When I was standing in a lunch line, I felt my hair move as someone inhaled. When I was at Walmart buying groceries, someone actually touched my hair, but they were gone when I turned around. It led me to become something of a recluse, and I only left the house if it was to go to work. Over time, my hair grew out, and I decided that I would have to get another cut. I went to bed, setting my alarm so I could get up early enough to go to Master Cuts down on Bonnie. It was Saturday. I had the day off, and I had chores to do before the business of relaxation. As I slipped off to sleep, I fell into a familiar dream, a dream that had plagued me for weeks. I was sitting in the chair at Mr. Faskel's, the cape falling around me like a spider web, and the old man asking if it was too tight. I didn't say anything. I was too scared to speak, and as the scissors began to clip, I trembled in fear. I didn't dare look back at the old man. I just knew his real face would be replaced by a monstrous visage, and I would wake up panting and looking around for nothing at all. When the alarm went off, I went to the bathroom to splash some water on my face and start the shower. My bare shoulders itched, and when I went to wipe it off, I noticed there was hair clinging to my sweaty hand. Not a lot, just leavings, like the leavings you find after a haircut. I ran to the bathroom and found that my hair was cut just the way I liked it. The sides were high and tight. The top was manageable but still thick, and my bangs were perfect. Everything was just as it usually was, and I felt a cold chill run through me that had nothing to do with the air conditioner. I called my landlord. I had the locks changed and reported to the police that someone had broken into my house and cut my hair. The police didn't really take it seriously. They made jokes about a midnight barber and asked if I'd left a tip under my pillow. I told them about Mr. Faskel, but when I gave them the address, they just shook their heads and walked away. They thought I was joking with them. They didn't believe a word of what I told them. And as I ran the shower, I remember sitting under the water for a very long time and just letting it run over me. The bits of hair flowing down the drain felt like a betrayal. 2 weeks later, I woke up to another fresh haircut. I called the police again, but they rolled their eyes and told me to calm down. I told them it was hard for me to calm down when someone was breaking into my house and cutting my hair. I demanded they go check on Mr. Faskell and told them right where the shop was, but they looked less than amused this time at the suggestion. I asked if they had talked to him yet, told them that he had been my barber for the last 3 years, but they just told me it hadn't been funny the first time, and it wasn't funny now. Why would it be funny? I asked, having to stop myself from grabbing one of them. Because Faskell's has never been opened. It's a prop for the city's revitalization project, like Cooley's Flowers across the street or Green Butcher beside it. It's just set dressing. It's never open. Mr. Faskell was a guy who owned a barbershop in the 1920s. He's dead. There's no Faskell who cuts hair. They left, and that left me pretty rattled. Mr. Faskell isn't a ghost. I know that. I have friends who go to him. I felt him touch me. He's flesh and blood, just like I am. I'm sure of it. The fact that he eats hair is incidental. The man is real, but if he isn't Mr. Faskell, then who is he? How does he keep breaking into my house? I have windows in my room, but they're barred with pieces of broom handle. I live on the 3rd floor, for God's sake. I changed the locks again. I wedged a chair under my door, and when I finally made myself calm down enough to sleep, I hoped it would end. I woke up completely bald this time. Not buzzed, not a zero guard, but bald. Like someone had shaved my head in my sleep and took the hair. They got my eyebrows too, my 5 o'clock shadow, my thick sideburns. I was as smooth and hairless as a newborn baby. I don't know what to do. I can't call the cops. They won't believe me. I can't call my landlord. He's replaced the locks twice now. And he's getting angry about it. I can't afford to move. I can't leave my job. I'm stuck. What I did find, however, was a message on my nightstand. I'm sure the cops will say that I wrote it, but I know I didn't. There's hair on it. It's written in a heavy hand, like a kid's scribbles. It's done on the back of an ad for Faskell's Hair and Beards, and the implication was pretty obvious. Come see me when it grows back. If you don't, it makes no difference. I know where to find you.
Coming in at number 2, we have a story about a story, I suppose. A story from Grandma about a family member who's gone but not forgotten. So let's learn why Grandma always said that Grandpa wasn't right.
I've been taking care of my grandma lately. She's been doing pretty bad, and she needs someone to help her almost 24/7. She's got kind of a bone disease or something. It's basically turning her bones into Swiss cheese. And I've had to carry her to the bathroom and room to room for the past couple of weeks. This might seem kind of tiresome to some people, but I'm glad to do it. My grandma and I have always been close. She basically raised me since my mother was never at home. If I can give back to her now, I consider it fair. She's been alone since I was in high school, and those 10 years have been the happiest I've ever seen her. She and Grandpa had been married for decades, 50 years before Grandpa just left, but they never seemed to get along. When I was young, Grandma would always come over and stay the night instead of having me come over there. Grandpa never came to our house. He mostly stayed close to home or went to work, but the few times I interacted with him, he seemed kind of off. Even as a kid, I didn't think he looked right. That might sound a little mean, but over time, he got paler and less coherent. He would mumble to himself with odd whispery things while he was watching TV. Grandma usually kept him in the bedroom with the TV on and the lights off. He disappeared suddenly when I was in the 9th grade, and it had been almost as much of a relief to me as for Grandma. So last week, when I slid her into bed and told her I was going grocery shopping the next day, so, she better get some sleep, she shook her head and looked away. I doubt I will. I think this might be my last night in this bed. Why, you eye in my bed? I'll swap you, but yours is a lot more comfortable than the one I'm in. No, son, she cut me off, her voice thready and weak. I think tonight might be the night I pass on. My eyes got a little big. Do I need to call Miss Sam? If you think you're going to pass, then I should get the nurse out here, too. I don't want them out here. You've been good to me, boy. I just want you here with me at the end. Besides, I need to tell you something. I need to confess my sins before I take 'em to heaven with me. I mean, I can call Pastor Ferris over if you need to talk to someone about matters spiritual. No, not Bobby Harris either. I want to confess to you. It's family business, and once I confess it to you, it'll be your burden to carry after I'm gone. I hesitated, thinking that I might not want this secret as I looked at Grandma's face. I had seen that face smile more than anything else, but the look she had now reminded me of something else I'd seen when I was young. It was something I hadn't noticed until I looked back through the lens of time, but Grandma had always seemed a little nervous whenever she stayed at our house. I caught her more than once checking the doors and windows, looking through the living room curtains as if expecting to see someone there. It always made me think that she was scared of someone. It was a look that always made me think a stranger was trying to get in so they could take me away. The truth, it seemed, was darker than that, though. I took a seat on the bed, willing to listen, as little as I wanted to. I'm here, Grandma. If you need to tell me something, then I'll listen. She nodded, looking out the window in her bedroom like someone might be there. Your granddad didn't disappear, she said, wetting her lips with her wrinkled tongue. I killed him. That was a shock, and my face must have said as much. She smiled, without much mirth. Didn't think your old grandma was capable of something like that, huh? No, it's just surprising. You guys lived together for decades. I'm not sure why you would choose 10 years ago to. It wasn't the first time, she said, her voice as thin as a spider web. I killed your grandpa for the first time in 1973. 10 years ago was just the last time I had to kill him. I was confused, and I said as much, but Grandma only nodded. Your grandpa, your real grandpa, died in 1972, but he didn't stay dead. She laid it all out, something that took us nearly into the next day, but she never stopped looking out the window as she spoke. I realized now she was looking for Grandpa. When the call came, I was pregnant with your mother. Your grandpa had avoided the draft by attending college and had managed to avoid it again with a waiver from the government. He was an engineer working on bridges and sewer systems in D.C., and I was looking forward to having him home for a few weeks. He had promised to come home before the baby was born, and he was excited to meet his daughter. We had wanted children for years, and when we talked, you could hear the tears on the verge of coming out whenever he talked about our future. The phone call that day, however, seemed to be the end of that dream. They said he'd been killed in a car accident, and that it had been very quick. He had been driving to a job site when someone had run a red light and slammed into the driver's side door. They said he died instantly, hadn't suffered a bit, and I suppose that should have been a mercy. They wanted to bury him in the Capitol, but I was adamant that he be buried here. I wanted his daughter to see him, to know her father, but I couldn't have known how much she would know of him. A week later, before his body was even home, I heard someone in the kitchen late one night. Grandma's voice got low, the husk making my skin crawl as she stared through the little window into the past. I must have looked aside as I came out with the baseball bat, but he never saw me coming. It was a man in military fatigues, eating a sandwich and sitting at my table like he owned the place. He hadn't bothered to turn on any of the lights, and the closer I got, the more I saw. He'd left a duffel bag on the floor beside him, and there was a glass of milk sweating on the table beside his plate. His fingers slipped into the white bread, and the lettuce and tomato looked wet against the roast beef poking out. I didn't challenge him. I didn't think he even knew I was there. When I hit him in the side of the head, he went down like a sack of potatoes. I killed him in that one hit. Hit him just right, I guess, but when I went to see who it was, I felt like I might have a heart attack. It was your granddad. He was laid out on the floor, bleeding from the ears, his blood staining his fatigues. I looked up the pins he had been wearing years after the fact and realized he'd been a corporal in the army. His paperwork said he was back on leave for the birth of his child. He was on 2 weeks of leave before he went back to Vietnam. I was confused. My husband had never been in the army, and as I sat there trying to figure out what to do, I decided to just bury him in the backyard. My husband was dead, and calling up the police to let them know that this man had broken in so he could eat a sandwich would only muddy the waters. So I buried him in the backyard. No easy feat for a woman 7 months pregnant. 3 days later, I was sitting in the living room folding laundry, just trying to get back to normal, when I heard a key in the front door. I heard someone coming in, set the bag down on the end table, and then I heard the last voice I ever expected to hear again. "Sorry I'm late, dear. There was something in the office I had to set up for tomorrow before coming home." It was your grandpa, dressed in a crisp white button-up and pressed suit pants. His tie was blue and white, something I'd never seen before, and it looked expensive. I'd never seen any of his clothes, and I was the one that did all the laundry. He spread his arms wide, waiting for a hug, but I couldn't move. I'd killed him. I'd killed him 3 nights ago. I watched him die, and as I backed away from him, I saw his face twist in confusion. It was painful, a look that hurt my heart. "What's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." "It's me. It's Wendell, your loving man." I was against the door frame, hyperventilating, clutching my stomach as your mother kicked inside me. She could sense my fear, feel my uncertainty, and she was responding in kind. He took a step towards me, and I curled into a ball as I tried to protect myself from whatever he meant to do. I expected him to try to attack me, to turn into a vengeful spirit and come after me, but instead he just wrapped his arms around me and hugged me close. "What's wrong, darling? Are you okay? Talk to me." It sounded just like him, and when I wrapped my arms around him, I realized it felt just like him, too. The smell of his aftershave, the rasp of his 5 o'clock shadow on my cheek, the way his hair smelled like Seltzer blue. It was all things that let me know it was him. When he hugged me to him, I gasped as I felt the lump on his inner arm where a birth defect had left a bone poking slightly out. It was him. It was your granddad, and I just leaned into him and sobbed as he helped me to my feet and took me to the bedroom. I checked the back of his head later that night when he slept, but there wasn't a mark or anything to lead me to believe that he had been the one I'd clobbered a few nights ago. I lived with that version of your grandpa for 6 months. He worked as a manager at a paper company, his degree in business instead of engineering, and he made a comfortable living for us. If I needed a reminder of the old times, however, I only had to look at the graduation photo hanging in the hallway. It was me and your grandpa in his cap and gown, and me in my best dress, smiling as his mom snapped a photo. I caught him looking at the picture sometimes, trying to rationalize it, before finally moving away to do whatever he'd been heading out to do. He was there for the birth of your mother, and I settled into a life of maternal bliss after that. Your grandfather was much the same as he'd always been, trading talk of bridges for talk of stocks and paper sales, but he was still the same man he'd always been. He loved your mother and me dearly. We never wanted for anything, but after a while, I suspected that something was off about him. It started with the sleep-talking. He would mumble ceaselessly from the time his eyes closed till the time they opened again. Your grandfather had always been a prolific snorer, ever since he was little, as his mother liked to say, but now he never seemed to breathe at all when he slept. He would mumble on and on about sewers and the war and stocks and paper and raising dogs and breeding horses and a million other things. Between your mother's nightly feedings and your grandfather's ceaseless muttering, I had become ragged. I couldn't sleep with all that yammering, and no matter where I slept, it always seemed to find me. I tolerated it until one night when I heard something familiar. I came awake to the sound of someone chewing and mumbling. Where are they? Chew, chew, chew. I can't believe I had to make my own food. It's not enough that I, chew, 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 went and fought them for her, but now I have to make my own sandwich. I had been sleeping on the couch, trying to get some sleep away from the muttering, and as I crept up the hall, listening to him mumble, and even the squeak of the door didn't rouse him from his nightmare. She couldn't even bother to wait for me, chew, 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 just because my bus was a little late. I'm a war hero, a soldier, and she can't even chew, chew. But he paused then, before gasping harshly. Ah, my head! What the hell is that? It's Maggie. Oh, God, she's killed me. She's killed me. She's bashed my head in with a bat. I'm dead on the floor, dead right by my kitchen table. My blood's going everywhere. She's killed me. The pillow was over his face before I could stop myself. I was just so ragged, so mentally fried that I knew he would tattle on me. He'd wake up and tell the police, and they'd find the body, and he'd be here alone with your mother, and who knew what would happen then? He wasn't her father, couldn't be her father, and he might hurt her or kill her, or... She looked back at me, and I could see her eyes swimming with tears. He only struggled a little, and then I had another body to bury. She was quiet for a moment, her eyes returning to the window, before continuing again. The next one was a car salesman, but he was less like your grandfather than the one before. I read something about how if you photocopy a photocopy, the quality degrades until it's almost unrecognizable. That's how this was. The next one sounded less like your grandfather than that, was paler than him, and seemed to get lost sometimes. I lived with this one for 2 years until he suddenly wandered into traffic outside our house. I told the police that this one was a cousin of my late husband, and that was why he looked so similar. The one after that bred horses, and when one of them threw him, I buried him at the edge of the range where he worked, and went home expecting to find another one. I was becoming pretty good at losing husbands by then, and when the next one showed up, I hit him with a frying pan and left him in the backyard with the others. By the time your mother came home from school, there was a new one in the living room, reading the paper. Over the years, I'm ashamed to say I've experimented on how durable they are. I pushed one off the roof after asking him to fix something for me. He broke his neck, and I added him to the growing mass grave in my backyard. I poisoned one over the course of a year until he finally dropped dead one morning over his oatmeal. I pushed one off a mountain during a hike, only to return to the hotel and find a new one there waiting for us. The copies became paler and less coherent. Their voices became softer and less substantial. It got to the point that he couldn't hold a job. His mind was like a dementia patient, and I would look up sometimes and find him watching me through the window of wherever I was. Your mother had moved out of the house by then. A retirement check from somewhere showed up in the mailbox from a company that manufactured pipes. The money was good. The money kept us afloat, but I was tired of living with this pale ghost. Then, about 8 years ago, he walked out of the house one morning and never came back. In many ways, it was a blessing. I had become responsible for him. I had to take care of him and lead him around like a child. Suddenly, I was responsible for just me again. I kept cashing those checks until they stopped coming about a year ago, and I kept waiting for the day when he'd come back. I almost dreaded it because it would mean that he had died, and a new pale copy would take his place again. Grandma turned away from the window, locking eyes with me as the night slid by outside. Now it's your secret. It's your secret and your burden. The bodies in the back are still there. I checked periodically, and though they decompose, the bones remain. I don't know if this version of your grandfather will ever come back, but you will have to watch for him now. I've left everything here for you. The house, the accounts, everything. It's yours now, and I pray it brings you joy. She lay back then, and I could almost watch the life slipping out of her. By midnight, she was dead, and when I turned to get the phone, I saw what she had been waiting for. Gramps was paler than I remembered him, but he looked exactly the same otherwise. He waved at me as he stood there before backing away and leaving the way he had come. I went to the backyard and looked, but there was no one there, and no clue that anyone had been there in the first place. We buried Grandma in a plot next to Grandpa's original body. She lay peacefully there beside her husband. The caretaker tells me that someone comes to see her, though, leaving a single wildflower behind before moving on. I don't think he'll come back, but who's to say what the future might bring? In the meantime, I called the police to let them know about all the bodies in the backyard. The sheriff came and exhumed them, asking all kinds of questions that he didn't seem to believe the answers to. He had them tested, and to his surprise, all of them came back a match for my grandfather. Dental records, DNA, hair samples, it all comes back a match, and they were all left scratching their heads. They couldn't really charge my grandmother with anything. You can't put a dead person in prison after all, and they were left with a mystery for the ages. Either way, it's nice to have the bodies gone, and it was good that Grandma got to die at peace. As for Grandpa, I guess I'll just have to wait for the day when a new one shows up. Hopefully, I won't have a body of my own to bury when he does.
And last, or should I say first, we have a story that everyone loves, a story that has certainly made the rounds, a story of kidnapping and worship and all the forms it can take. So let's hear a story about how I was a captive god.
You'll have to bear with me while I tell you my story. So much of it is written from the hazy recollections of someone who was in captivity. Don't misunderstand. I wasn't abused in the traditional sense. I was well kept, I was well fed, and I really wanted for nothing except my freedom. It all started one day when I visited a new therapist. Dr. McAllister had been recommended by a friend of mine. He said he was very good, and he'd helped him get through a lot of issues that he had with his mother and discover some things about his sexuality. He put you under and put you in touch with your real self, and that was how he overcame a lot of your issues. It all sounded great to me. I'd been having trouble sleeping and was looking for some way to get the sleep I needed to function. My insomnia would sometimes last for days, and it was starting to affect my life. So, I made an appointment, and 2 weeks later I was lying on his couch, listening to Dr. McAllister count down from 10 as he put me in a suggestive trance. It was very sudden, like blinking, but everything changed after that trance. When I came out just as suddenly, Dr. McAllister looked strange, and I asked if something had happened. Strange may not be descriptive enough. He looked somehow enraptured, enlightened, utterly worshipful. You spoke to me about things you couldn't possibly have known. You talked to me about my childhood. You helped me get over the death of my mother. You helped me more in this hour-long session than I've ever helped anyone. I wasn't sure what he was talking about, but when he gripped my hand, his eyes shone like the lights of a zealot. I need more. Please let me put you back under, so I can discover more. I pulled away from him and took a huge step back. What the hell was he talking about? I had come here for help, but suddenly he wanted me to help him. I had to get out of here. I had to leave now. McAllister tried to stop me, but I was out the door before he could say much more than stop. I didn't sleep well that night either. It was becoming a real problem. Sometimes I would lay in bed and swear I heard whispers, but I put it off as auditory hallucinations. I hadn't slept well in the past 3 weeks, and I knew it was something that would catch up to me eventually. When I would force myself out of the house for work or to run errands, I could swear I felt someone watching me. What's more, I could swear I'd catch glimpses of someone from the corner of my eye, but they would always be gone when I turned to look at them. It never happened in my house, always when I was out and about, and the paranoia on top of the sleep deprivation was slowly eroding my sanity. So, when I heard someone open a window in my living room one night, I rolled over and just thought it was me having paranoid hallucinations. Turned out, it hadn't been a hallucination. When I heard someone open my bedroom door, I rolled over and found Dr. McAllister standing there watching me. He looked like he hadn't been sleeping well either, and his eyes looked crazed as we stood staring at each other. I wasn't sure if he was real or not, but when he lunged at me, I curled into a ball and cried out for him to stop. He didn't attack me, though. He didn't hurt me at all, though now I wish he'd killed me right there. Instead, he just slipped a needle into my arm, and I watched his thumb push down the plunger as I felt a wave of warm and inviting sleep roll through me. I woke up in a finished basement, the lights turned down low, strapped to a chair as Dr. McAllister made sure my bindings were comfortable. I struggled, my limbs heavy and uncoordinated, but he held up a fresh needle and told me if I didn't calm down, he was going to put me out again. I made myself as still as I could, not sure what to expect here. This didn't seem to be a sexual thing. I was fully dressed, and the way he was tending to me almost felt worshipful. I didn't want it to come to this, but I can't live without the knowledge you possess. I know you don't believe what I'm saying, but while you were unconscious, you told me about things that may very well change my life. You spoke to me of things that opened my eyes, ideas I had never even conceived of, and the longer I went without hearing your voice again, the more I felt my newfound security crumbling. I'm sorry, I'm not usually like this, but I had to possess you, to have your knowledge, to understand your words. I can promise you that while you remain with me, you'll you'll want for nothing. You are to me as a captured god that I wish to understand. We talked a lot that night, though I mostly yelled at him to let me go. In the end, though, he just injected me with something to knock me out, and I drifted off into a peaceful unconsciousness. And that was how I became Dr. McAllister's captive god. I will say that while I was with him, I never wanted for restful sleep. This was due in part to the fact that I spent most of my time in a near catatonic state. Dr. McAllister kept me restrained in a large underground area that I always thought of as the basement. I was seated in a large, comfortable chair, my hands secured to the arms with soft straps. There was a remote at hand, and I was allowed to watch anything I wanted on television, as long as the doctor was away. If I was hungry, all I had to do was push a button, and a short blonde woman, who I would later discover was the doctor's wife, would bring me anything I wanted. In the beginning, it really wasn't so bad. I was kept in a sluggish state from the drugs he used on me to induce the state that he wanted, but it wasn't bad. I watched TV, I ate, I existed. Given that I had worked 40-plus hours a week and lived off crappy food for most of my adult life, I felt almost like I was being pampered. I was free to relax. I could do almost anything, except leave or talk to people who were likely to wonder what had happened to me. My mom, my dad, my friends. I wondered if any of them wondered what had happened to me. It may seem odd to you that I never tried to escape, but my head was always in a cloud of some sort. The drugs left me just lucid enough to consume TV or audiobooks, but I never felt able to really settle my thoughts on anything in particular. I knew I should want to escape, but it was always a hard concept to catch hold of. Those days were the good days, back when Dr. McAllister was still operating his practice. That was when he was still pretending to have a normal life. He would come down in the evenings to talk with me, just telling me his problems and asking me to help. He would ask me about stocks or bonds, the housing market, business ideas, patents, inventions, and I would try my best to direct him in the way he wanted. I wasn't really sure what he wanted. My head was too foggy most of the time to make sense of it, but I would try my best to help him without the need to be placed in an unconscious state. We'd talk for hours about everything from the state of his marriage, the depraved childhood he had lived through, the future of psychology, and even the condition of his soul. I didn't always want to hear what he had to say, but I understood that it didn't really matter what I wanted. It didn't seem to make much of a difference anyway. We would talk for hours, but the end result was always a needle in my arm or my neck and several hours of blissful unconsciousness. I remember little from these periods of blackout, fortunately, but sometimes I would go to a dark place and just hang suspended in the murk. Things would whisper to me there, tell me things I couldn't understand. I was powerless to stop them. This happened very rarely, but it was still too often for my tastes. I don't know what I said to Dr. McAllister in those times, but there was always a drastic change when I came back to myself. It wasn't always for the better either. Once I came back to myself and felt something wet in my lap. I glanced down, which was difficult because my head was strapped to the headrest, and found that someone had thrown a head into my lap. I flinched away from it as my groggy brain finally clicked it all together, but it was little more than a shudder in my current state. The head had wispy gray hair, a pair of broken glasses hanging across the face from one ear, and a nose full of broken veins from a lifetime of drinking. I didn't recognize it, but as it soaked the pants of my pajamas, I did feel like it was familiar somehow. Dr. McAllister was sitting across from me, looking expectantly at the gift he had literally dropped in my lap, and I looked at it with confusion as I asked why he had done this. You told me to. You said if I meant to truly get over the cruelty and abuse that my father had given me, then I had to destroy the icon of my father within myself. So I did. I told him that I wanted to meet so we could discuss our past and reconcile. He was ecstatic. He hadn't seen me in 20 years, and oh, did we reconcile. I waited for him to turn around, and I bashed his head in with a hammer, choking him to death as he lay twitching on the floor. Then I took the body and disposed of it, cutting the head off so I could show you that I'd followed your instructions. You're so wise, so correct. I am your loyal disciple, always. I started screaming, mindless, gibbering noise, but he just bowed to me, and when the head hit the ground next to him, he didn't even flinch. That was my first inclination that the things I was saying in my sleep might be used in this way, in ways that I had never considered. After that, he started bringing people down to see me. At first, it was his wife, the blonde woman who'd been feeding me. She looked skeptical as she approached, content to keep her husband's secrets, but unsure of joining him in this new experiment. I knew from our talks that he was afraid she would leave him, but enjoyed the financial stability of their marriage. He stuck me with the needle as she sat a few feet away, and when I came to, she was bowing and crying and thanking me for helping her see the truth. My husband was right. You are truly a god. I was wrong to ever doubt you, or him. After that, it was friends and colleagues. They all seemed confused when he introduced them to me, calling me his god of knowledge, and some of them laughed, thinking it was a joke. They would sit and talk to me, listening to my answers, and looking at McAllister as if to ask if this were an elaborate prank. In the end, though, when I came back from the little nap he would subject me to, it was always the same. Their smirks of disbelief or scowls of confusion were replaced with rapturous awe, and they would pledge their undying fealty to me. No matter how many of them I begged to release me, the outcome was always the same. A religion of sorts began to form. Over time, McAllister drew in his cult. It was only a few at first, 5, 10, but it quickly grew into a sizable little flock. The followers began to take care of me, washing and feeding and seeing to my every whim, except the most important. I would ask them to release me, beg them to let me go, but it was always interpreted as a test of some sort. Their god was testing them to see if they were loyal to the here or to the hereafter, and they would thank me for helping them fortify their belief in me as they slid my hands back into the restraints or pushed my head back into the buckles. I yelled at them. I called them idiots. I tried to push them, but the constant use of sedatives and the lack of any regular exercise had made me weak. I wasn't wasting away, but I wasn't getting the exercise I needed to be certain. I could do little to free myself. My bonds always replaced, and after a while I just gave in. The funny thing was that whatever I was telling them while I was under was working. McAllister showed me the money he had made, earned from the stock market and selling property, and the cult began to thrive. What's more, they all claimed to have cast off whatever addictions or mental health problems or childhood traumas had plagued them, and they were addicted now to nothing but serving me. Like McAllister had said, those who tried to leave or to return to their lives reported feeling hopeless and manic unless they could return to my presence and hear my words, whatever they were. That's when things started to get bad. McAllister was truly addicted to my influence, and it led him to overstep. McAllister had been gathering his followers at his home, and while it was large, it was becoming too small to hold all of them. I can't really speculate how many there were, but the basement was standing room only. I sat beneath a small bar that he was standing on, and the sea of bodies was dizzying. Though he was speaking, they all looked at me as if I were speaking through him. So many eyes looking at me. My body still held in the chair I had sat in for God knew how long, was something I never quite got used to. It never made me feel like a deity. It never made me feel powerful to have them worship me. It always made me feel like a pet, my freedom just one open door away. McAllister said they'd be moving to a new place soon, a place that would house them all comfortably. They could all stay there indefinitely, leaving their jobs and lives behind so they could care for their captive god. He didn't say where it was, but he said they would all go this afternoon and prepare for a long journey. They were all so happy, their faces enraptured as he told them about their new home. But I began to feel that this would never end. When he began to bring people to see me, I had hoped that someone would fail to see me as he did and get me out of here. They would take me away from him. They would call the police, and I would be saved from my captivity. That never happened. Whatever power I had held them in sway, and after a while I doubted that I would ever get out of here. I didn't know how long I had been McAllister's captive god, but I knew that no matter how comfortable the life, this had to end. I decided then that if they weren't going to get me out, I would have to do it myself. Strangely, my chance came that very day. They had all left me so they could prepare, and as I sat in the shadowy basement, I realized that my wrist strap was undone. This had never happened before. For a moment, I wasn't sure what to do. It took all the energy I had to focus enough to get my hand to undo the other strap. And when I bent down to undo my legs, the effort seemed to take years. My mind was like unraveling yarn, and it was hard to focus on any particular task. When the bonds came off my legs, I got shakily to my feet before bending to rub some life into them. They were prickly from the lack of use, and I took shaky steps as I made for the stairs. I got to the top before I was discovered. I peeked through the door and into the barren kitchen beyond. The cupboards were empty, the countertops clean, and I could tell that this room had already been cleaned out for the move. I had just decided to take a step out and make for the back door when someone walked into the kitchen and saw me. They called for McAllister, walking to me as they insisted I return to my chair. I pushed at them, telling them to get away from me, to get out of my way, but as I lunged for the back door, I heard others coming in to stop me. I made it to the backyard, squinting at the sun as it hit my eyes, but I found it fenced with tall wooden boards. I was grabbed by many hands, and when someone slipped a needle into my neck, I looked back to see McAllister instruct them to get me in the car. I came to some time later, and I was laying in an elaborate bed, my hands cuffed to the frame. That began the worst part of my confinement, though it was thankfully the end of it. After that, the drugging became worse. McAllister and his inner circle kept me in a near constant catatonic state. The drugs he used were no longer just injected, and they began to experiment with other substances. The documents that were found later said they received different outcomes when different kinds of drugs were used, and they often sat around and drank or laughed as I came in and out of reality. I was aware of nothing in those times. A ship drifting on a sea of time. I could have been with them for days. I could have spent decades under their control. But to me, time was only islands glimpsed from afar. I didn't see many people in that time, just the 5 or so who were in McAllister's inner circle. But these men always spoke as if they were doing very well. Often there was cigar smoke around my bed, the smell of expensive liquor, and always the low murmur of talk as they waited for me to tell them what else they might do to gain more power. I'd become their oracle, their captive god as opposed to their revered deity, and they threatened to use me up. These are the times I remember the least about, except for the end. I spent a lot of my days in a black stupor, and the more they experimented, the more often I was back in the dark place. When I came back from these trances, I noticed a change in my captors. Gone were the shining eyes of the enraptured. Disappeared were the weeping orbs of the enlightened. They were replaced by the flinty eyes of the zealot, and I was afraid that he might break his promise. He looked angry, but also resolved. Whatever I had told him weighed heavily on him, but I wouldn't understand the burden, not for a while yet. Not until the day it all came to an end. I came to one afternoon to find an intrusive light leaking into my dark chamber. They had always kept me in this persistent dark room, but now the door was open, and something was laying in it. On the floor, there were others, none of them moving, and I was confused by their sudden stillness. Was this something new? Were they sleeping, or were they... I tried to put that thought out of my head. They couldn't be dead, I reminded myself as I shook my chains. If they were all dead, then who would free me so I didn't die here too? I did as you said, came a monotone voice, and I jumped as I realized that one of the slumped forms had only been praying. It was McAllister. He looked wild. His salt and pepper hair was sticking up at odd angles, and his face was splattered with blood. His shirt was soaked in something as it hung on him like a wet sack. He appeared to be praying, but something clinked in his shaky hands. I saw that he held a gun. I was afraid that he would shoot me too for half a second, but as he put it under his chin, I became even more afraid that he would use it on himself. I have risen as high as I can. Your will dictates that I must shed my vehicle to rise any higher. I shall see you on the other side. His blood made a crimson line across my face as the gun went off. And suddenly, my fears were realized. I was alone. Luckily for me, someone heard the gunshot. I would lay in that bed for 2 days before the FBI came to investigate the compound. Turned out they'd been keeping an eye on McAllister for quite some time, ever since he had started gathering followers at his home. After 2 years in his new compound, they had begun to try to prepare a case against him, before he woke up one morning and decided to put an end to his little flock. With the help of his wife, they had poisoned the morning meal, and McAllister had drawn his inner circle to a meeting before breakfast. That's where he shot them, as they sat listening to my latest ramblings. They had found journals that claimed there were things I had told them, but after interviewing me, I think they decided that he was out of his mind. At least, that's what Agent Maxit led me to believe. We're going to have to hold you as a person of interest, but it honestly sounds like you were an unwilling participant. I'm going to go and get some things in order. Have a seat. We'll make some accommodations for you. After he left, I noticed the recorder sitting on the table. It wasn't running, which I had expected, and when I reached for it, I Saw the tape inside had a date on it that I remembered. It was the date of my first session with Dr. McAllister. Couldn't imagine a reason behind the FBI having a tape with that date on it, unless McAllister had recorded it for some reason. I put the recorder back down, trying to stop my curiosity before it could take root. I had never heard what I sounded like in that state that seemed to enrapture the old doctor so much. What had I said to him to make him throw his whole life away in the pursuit of it? I couldn't help myself. I hit play on the recorder and listened as McAllister told me to be calm and began to count down from 10. It wasn't the jagged, often flighty voice I remembered from any time after his session. This was McAllister at his most sane, and as he came to 1, I heard him gasp and ask what I was doing. From the recording, I heard a slightly deeper version of my own voice, and it filled me with dread. Agent Maxett has been listening to the tapes. He's becoming as unstable as the good doctor. If you don't escape now, I fear that he'll have you just like McAllister did. You'll have to be quick, and you'll have to be smart. But if you mean to be free, you need to find a way out of here. Good luck.
And just like that, our stories are at an end for another day. Thanks for joining us, and I hope we'll see you again very soon tomorrow for more Cozy Horror. Until then, this is Dr. Plague, wishing you a wonderful day and a spooky evening.